Shalom, shalom to all my fellow brothers and sisters out there. It's me again, Damian Power from YeshuaSavesAll.com. Peace be to you in the name of our Father, Yahweh, and our Adon, which means master in Hebrew, the Son of Yahweh, Yeshua HaMashiach. So today, my fellow brothers and sisters, we are going to be discussing, should you be eating mushrooms? Excuse me. Mushrooms are a food that many people love all over the world, and I was included in this years ago, and I felt like it was something that needed to be discussed. We know that mushrooms, you can put them on hamburgers or pizzas, or even saute them with onions, but the question arises that many people never think of is that should we be eating mushrooms? So as always, let's see what the word of Yahweh has to say on this. Let's start off with Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 29. And Elohim said, see, I've given you every plant. So that's the key word. Let's look at plants that yield seed, which is on the face of all the earth. And every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it is for food. So there's two things, plant, and it has to yield seed. So that's a whole nother topic. When people run around eating seedless watermelons or all kind of seedless fruits and vegetables, that's not what our Father Yahweh intended for you to eat. It has to have seed, okay? So don't let man get you by manipulating your food with the GMO process. But the main topic here today is mushrooms, okay? So it has to be a plant and it has to yield seed. So now let's look at the etymology of the original word for plant in Hebrew. What is plant defined in Hebrew? The Hebrew word is eseb, S-E-B, which is Strong 6212, and this is the definition of eseb for plant. To glisten or be green, grass, herb. And Brown Driver Briggs defines it as herb, herbage, grass, green plant. So just based off the Hebrew alone right there, we can already rule out that mushrooms are not grass. They are not green, okay? And every herb or plant that produces green leaves. So for example, every herb or plant produces green leaves. So think about this. If you grow basil, it's going to be green, right? And even like, for example, oregano. But even if you grow potatoes or carrots, for example, even though that part grows under the ground, they still produce green leaves above and flowers above the ground. You see, it's always going to be green leaves. And we can already determine that mushrooms don't have either. They're not green and they don't produce any flowers or leaves. Okay? And an herb is defined as a plant with leaves, seeds, or flowers used for flavoring food, medicine, or perfume. Any seed-bearing plant that does not have a woody stem and dies down to the ground after flowering. So mushrooms are not herbs either, as we just defined, because they do not have leaves, they do not contain seeds because they have spores, and they do not have flowers. Flowers that grow on the top of the plant is where seeds come from. According to gardeningknowhow.com says, where do seeds come from? They are the byproduct of a flower or flower-like structure. Sometimes seeds are encased in fruits, but not always. Seeds are the primary method of propagation in most plant families because they're seed-bearing. That's the way Yahweh created them to be, so the seed will produce more plants, right? Mushrooms don't have flowers to produce seed. They don't even have leaves. So people want to classify spores as seeds, but that's not the same. So mushrooms are not herbs or grass. They are not green. They do not have leaves or flowers, so they cannot be classified as plants. And we see that Yahweh said that we can eat every plant with the definition of aseb. So are mushrooms considered plants? Many will be surprised to find out that mushrooms are not considered plants, as I just gave from the definition, but we'll get into some of the science concerning it. But rather a fungus and is closely related to the mold and mildew family. I know most people will be uncomfortable with putting mold or mildew on top of their pizza or hamburger. So what makes mushrooms any different? Newsmedical.net defines mushrooms as fungi, fungus. It's biologically distinct from plant and animal derived foods. Wikipedia adds that mushrooms are the fleshly spore bearing fruiting body of a fungus. Reference.com says by the time a mushroom emerges from the ground, the fungus has usually been feeding in place for some time. So it's been feeding before it even pops up on the ground that what we can physically see with our eyes. Fungi send out specialized tendrils or hyphae into the soil and plants around them to expose a maximum surface area into the surrounding environment. These hyphae then secrete the necessary proteins directly into the edible manner. These proteins then do the work of breaking down plant and animal tissues. You have to think about that. They break down plant and animal tissue. And mushrooms are known to absorb the toxins in the soil. So mushrooms eat dead organic matter of plants and animals, which is something that plants don't do. So back to our mushrooms plants. According to livescience.com, tens of thousands of organisms from mushrooms to mold to yeast fall under the umbrella of fungi. Once thought simply to be plants, fungi have emerged as their own taxonomic kingdom. The various fungal species are diverse with many unique properties, some innocuous, some useful, and some harmful. So as you can see, again, even the science is saying that they are not plants, but fungi. So let's look at some more witnesses concerning this. So we already defined based off of scripture alone and based off the Hebrew of the word plant, aseb, that mushrooms are not plants, right? But let's look at some more witnesses. As recently as the 1960s, fungi were considered plants. They were considered plants. In fact, at that time, all organisms were classified in only two groups of kingdoms, plants and animals. In a 1969 article published in the journal Science, ecologist Robert Whitaker explained the basis of the two kingdom system. For many decades in history, the only living creatures humans observed around them were either rooted plants that produced their own food or motile animals that sought out their food. Thus, mobility and the method of gaining nourishment became the criteria for a system of classification. The animals moved and plants did not. And that's how fungi got stuck with plants, said Tom Volk, a professor of botany at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. However, unlike plants, fungi do not contain the green pigment chlorophyll. And remember, Yahweh said every green plant, right? So they don't contain the green pigment chlorophyll and therefore are incapable of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is what plants do. That is, they cannot generate their own food, carbohydrates, by using energy from light. This makes them more like animals in the terms of their food habits. So mushrooms are more like animals. Fungi need to absorb nutrition from organic substances, compounds that contain carbon, like carbohydrates, fats, or proteins. Based on these and other properties, in 1969, Whitaker proposed that fungi become separate kingdoms as a part of a new five-kingdom system of classification. The proposed classification included a vast array of species, among them mushrooms, yeast, molds, slime molds, water molds, puffballs, and mildews. So the science eventually caught up to what our Father Yahweh already knew in the beginning. Since then, the system of classification in the fungal kingdom have been further refined. For example, slime molds and water molds are shuttled off to a different kingdom. Today, the members of the kingdom fungi are also known as the true fungi. Let's look at another source here. Southmill.com adds more science as to why mushrooms are not plants. And the title is The Difference Between Mushrooms and Plants. So again, the science finally caught up to what our Elohim already knew. The same thing that I talked about in the video about mixed fabrics. Like the science caught up saying that, certain fabrics cancel each other out and all of those things, right? So the science caught up with our Elohim already knew in the beginning. Same thing here. So this title is The Difference Between Mushrooms and Plants. They say, what is mushroom an example of? Mushrooms are heterotrophs. This means they rely on food sources in their surroundings for nutrients. They rely on their food sources in their surroundings for nutrients, such as plant matter, animal waste, and organic carbon. And mushrooms' source of food differs from plants because plants are autotrophic. They are capable of creating their food from simple organic compounds. Now, I would like to add this, what I was just saying, from NHPHS.org. Nature Works adds that mushrooms/fungi eat organic matter, which are the remains of organisms such as plants and animals, and their waste products in the environment. Fungi release enzymes that decompose dead plants and animals. Fungi absorb nutrients from the organism they are decomposing. So mushrooms appear to have the same characteristics as scavengers, eating dead things, even animals. Not only do they eat the waste of animals, they also eat the remains of dead plants and animals. Because as the first source that I gave said that mushrooms are heterotrophs, says that they rely on the food sources from their surroundings for nutrients. So whatever is there, whether it be a dead animal or dead plants or animal waste, that's where they get their food from. And remember, I was saying from the article earlier, is that their hyphae or their tendrils are already feeding before they eat, before you even see the mushroom. They've been feeding in that place before you actually ever see that mushroom pop up above the ground. So they have unclean characteristics, as we can see that they're like a scavenger. Cellular structure, mushrooms versus plants. Both mushrooms and plants have cell walls, but their difference lies in its composition. The cell wall of a plant is composed of cellulose, while the cell walls of a mushroom are created from complex polysaccharides, glucan and chitin. And mushroom's cell wall protects it from predators and enhances its structural integrity. Now, let's look at how a mushroom consumes nutrients. Mushrooms are dissimilar to plants in the same way they consume food as well. Plants contain chlorophyll and undergo photosynthesis to sustain growth, but mushrooms do not function the same. Before nutrients can penetrate the cell wall, they must be digested. This means that mushrooms are opposite humans in their food, that their food must be digested before taking in nutrients. So mushrooms are almost similar to humans, that they have to have the food digested. In this respect, only bacteria are like mushrooms, as their nutrients intake method is the same. So you see that they're just like bacteria, mildew, mold. Mushrooms reproduction. If humans are examples of mammals, you may be wondering, what is a mushroom an example of? Like humans, mushrooms can produce sexually, which occurs when the spore of one mushroom meets with the spore of another, and a new mushroom is formed. However, mushrooms can also produce asexually. Sexual reproduction leads to greater genetic diversity in mushrooms. Asexual reproduction involves fragmentation of budding of the mushroom, wherein the mushroom essentially copies itself, not seed bearing. The recognizable cap of a mushroom, the part typically used in cooking, is vital to reproduction as spores found in the gills. Slits located under the cap help create new mushrooms. Mushrooms, for the most part, belong to either the Basid Makota or Ascom Yacota phyla. Excuse me on the pronunciation or these scientific terms. Basidios are more common than Asos, as the former includes all mushrooms with gills. Ascos mushrooms feature a cup-like cavern in which the spores are contained. How and where do mushrooms grow? The best growth conditions for mushrooms depends on the species, but mushrooms typically do best in soil, damp areas that are enriched and available in nutrients. Locations where you might find wild mushrooms growth include the base of trees, under pieces of wood, and gardens. Mushrooms can be further classified into two types of growth patterns and preferred nutrients. I remember what made me start questioning mushrooms was when I go to the park and I'll see them growing in damp areas in the dark. And like these places like I would never see like really plants would grow. And I just thought it was interesting. You would like the article pointing out, you would see them growing on tree stumps and stuff, which I just thought was interesting. But anyway, according to the scriptures, according to the Hebrew word, it said mushrooms are not classified as plants. As I said, they are not herbs. They don't have they don't have flowers. They don't have leaves, and they don't bear seed. And they are considered fungus. So, as always, let us touch no unclean thing and unlearn the ways of the world and come back to the scriptures and see what the scriptures have to say on these things. And I'm telling you, it's always good to start studying the etymology of the word so that you can find out what our Father Yahweh was telling us in the beginning, so that we don't get caught up in what man classifies as food and what isn't. Like I said, I've talked about seaweed before, bladderwrack and all those things. Those are algae that grow on rocks. They are not seed-bearing, okay? And they want to classify them as sea vegetables. But like I said, they're algae and they're not plants. They're not seed-bearing, okay? And they don't even have the same cellular structure as a plant that's on the earth. So we have to be careful what we're taking. I know it's popular for people to eat their bladderwrack, to eat kelp, to eat seaweed, or the hidden term carrageenan. But you have to be careful and see what the scriptures have to say on these things. So as always, may our Father Yahweh bless you all in Yeshua HaMashiach's name. And Todah Rabbah, thank you very much for joining in, and shalom.